So I've been for a little while now looking into machine translation, which is of course a booming area. So every second person seems to be interested in that topic, and I hope you have some interest as well and some expertise that I hope you are going to share with me in the discussion at the end of the talk. So I'm going to talk about a survey which I conducted 2 years ago, and a project which is a current project which I'm currently conducting. So that's very, very fresh data I wanted to share with you as well, just to make it a bit more up to date. So I called my talk Developing Machine Translation Literacy for Language Education. Now, as you will be well aware of, I mean, Google Translate, of course, is a well-known app of everybody. Then some other maybe less well-known ones, or depending on the part of the world where you are, at DeepL or APACALL, Microsoft Translator, Babylon. I mean, there's a number of different machine translation apps available, and sometimes these are embedded, so we don't even see that they are there. So we are really living in a world, in an online world of machine translation. And of course, our language students are very well aware about that as well. And we know now from research from the last 20 years even, that language learners are using machine translation frequently and extensively. So there's a number of surveys from before 2016 and after, and I say in a minute why this date is important, that indicate that language learners are frequently using those tools. Now, teachers are quite often not so keen because they feel that students are taking shortcuts by using those tools, but students don't seem to be intimidated by that. So they're still using machine translation even if they're being told not to do so, because there's some universities, some schools have policies which prohibit the use of machine translation. And another interesting thing to share, I thought, was that teachers who usually think they are able to see if the students are using those tools, but studies have shown that they're actually not able to do that. So as machine translation has become more accurate, it has been more and more difficult to detect machine translation use, which also changed. So the tell signs of machine translation have changed over time, and sophistication of those tools. So bottom line, really, it is we can't. It's there. It's kind of living, we're living without the internet, and we won't be able to do without. So we really need to accept that machine translation is part of our world, is part of our students' world, and we need somehow to accept it in our language curriculum. Now, there's a number of studies which show a number of benefits of machine translation use, and those studies mainly focus on writing. So how can students improve their writing, not just their writing, because of course it can improve it, but their writing skills through the use of machine translation. So there have been some studies showing that the overall writing quality can improve, that students pay more attention to the at macro level revision with less anxiety about micro level mistakes. And also that it helps students foster metalinguistic awareness of their second language. So a number of benefits have been shown for writing, but also precautions as well. If students are not trained to use those tools appropriately, it can lead to dependency, and in that sense, it could compromise the second language development. Now, as I just said here, most of the work has been focusing on writing, which of course quite often is what students do in their own time outside of class time. So maybe that's the easiest way as well where it comes in. But of course, I mean, translators can also be used in other language skills, for listening, for speaking, and another possible benefit, which also is, we talk about anxiety here, has other benefits where students maybe grow in confidence because they feel they're supported in their language work, and also it can possibly support learners to become more autonomous in their learning. So this is an area in which I'm particularly interested. So Google Translate, I just mentioned before, the studies before and after 2016. Now 2016 has a bit of a milestone in machine translation. There have been quite a few milestones, but I'm not going over the history of machine translation. Just this one here. So Google Translate has been around for some time, and it has had quite bad press for a very long time. And it was maybe more known for the mistakes it made and for the funny results it gave than for the help it actually provided. But so we have a screenshot here on the left from an older version of Google Translate, and on the right this is just a screenshot from today, where I just put in the similar word. I mean, just in the other language direction. So in 2016, Google Translate transitioned to a different system. So it's using the AI-based version of an AI version, and is powered by a neural machine translation model. So that means it has developed, and I'm not going to go into the technicality of technical aspects of that, but it's a much more accurate way of translating. It's just not going on the old rule-based system, but it's really taking those chunks of language which are fed by machine learning. So it's a corpus that grows. The more we put in, the more this corpus grows, and it will therefore also develop an accuracy over time. So Google Translate is a very well-known machine translation app. The other one, which is quite well-known, especially with European scholars, is DeepL. DeepL doesn't have as many languages as Google Translate. Google Translate has a servicing over 100 languages, so it's really, really very comprehensive, with a number of with lots of different features as well. So it's not just the written intake, it's also the oral intake. It's transcribes in real time. So it has a number of really sophisticated features. You might have been, I mean, I'm sure you all have used it at different levels. The camera intake, the ability to have a conversation with somebody in 2 languages, and the app translating that at the same time. So DeepL might not have doesn't have as many languages, and might not have as many features, although you see the little icons here, and there's more and more features coming up as well. So you have camera functions, speech input, etc. as well. But it claims to be more accurate. So there's a number of studies that have been published by DeepL that show that. And there is a few other features as well as the alternative options when you put in a translation to get more alternative phrasings. So there is a bit of a difference between the two. They're being fed different corpora as well. But I would say that the main difference is that Google Translate is available for more languages, and maybe it's a bit more well known. But a bit more about that later. So what I did is 2 years ago, I did a study at my university. So we're teaching 5 languages at the University of Otago in New Zealand. And I sent out a survey to all our students of Chinese, French, German, Japanese, and Spanish at different levels, and their teachers. So we're a small department, so we don't have that many teachers, but almost everybody responded. So I could match the responses from the students and their teachers, which were complimentary surveys, many of them also with open-ended answers, which I analyzed, and really to get a better understanding to what students, how students use, I mean, what they say, how they use machine translation, what teachers say, how they use machine translation, and of course the question, and what are the implications for focusing here on the L2 writing contexts. Now, interestingly, so teachers, as I said, it's a very small number, so maybe not that representative, although for my department it is, but not, of course, I can't generalize those findings. But 4 of the 12 never used at all any machine translation. Then we had 4 occasional users and 4 who used it quite regularly. And I'm just reading out the occasional users, which I thought was an interesting quote. So the colleague who said, I seldom use online translators. When I used Google Translate several times in the past, it was not that advanced yet. So I ended up making quite a few mistakes. However, these translators must have improved a lot recently. I should check them out. So maybe just taking the survey, that colleague maybe might look into it a bit. Other colleagues, a bit more a bit more involved. So this colleague here seems to be a regular user who has colleagues and family who speak different languages, and she's using she or he was using the tool a bit in her private life, which doesn't really mean that they're using it in their classes, but at least there's an understanding of what those tools are doing. So I was a bit surprised how that we had that the 4 and the 8 of occasional and non-users amongst staff. Now, this is, of course, in contrast to students, 90% who are using machine translation, a bit more on their computers and on their phones. And as you go increase in level, in proficiency, more students are using them. Now, interesting when we asked, what are you using them for? So teachers basically more or less believe that they're using them to take shortcuts. So like here you have the teachers are in the green, like translating entire texts. So just making it easy, not having to read the text in the target language, and also to look up words while writing, so using accessible dictionary. So not to read to avoid reading in the target language, and for writing. So basically having those traditional skills. So this is not, if you look now at the blue, this is not the way the students see it. So translating entire text is not really what they do. It's much more to look up words as they read, and writing is a thing, but also the other skills, which are quite often not reflected in those other studies, are used as well. So for listening, for speaking, to look up words and how they're pronounced. Pronunciation is quite an important one. So these things, which are of course more inherent to the technology than to what we are used to in the classroom, well, associated with technology, show this as a different picture of how those tools are used in a different way by students and what teachers think of them. Partly, of course, we have all those different input types, and staff or teachers were not really aware of them. So it's not just a writing and reading tool. It's a tool that we can use on a multimodal level. So by writing, but also by voice input or by camera. For instance, I have a few student examples here. I occasionally use text to speech of an entire passage I've written to see if it sounds natural. So just a double checking here, or camera to text, somebody who takes notes and then takes a picture, a timid picture of them, so to get them translated. Or for the Asian languages here, we have the kanji, which of course is quite neat to use the drawing facility. Now, what do our students use the tool for? So we looked really at the different levels of students. So students use different tools, the tools at different levels, for beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And you see there's a nice similar breakdown in number, but also we made a comparison between European and Asian languages. So what we see here is that students are more likely to do single word searches at the beginner's level, but move more into words and context and phrases at a higher level. So single word searches are maybe more at a level where beginners are operating, but also maybe an understanding of the more advanced learners, that you get more accurate results if you use a word in a sentence in a machine translation tool than if you just use a word, which of course can have different meanings. And therefore, you might get different results, which might not reflect on what you have been looking for. So something where a real dictionary might be a better choice. The other thing is that they use machine translation for grammar corrections, and this decreases as students get more advanced. And it's more prevalent for European languages than for Asian languages. There's probably different rationales for that, but I'm just going a bit, I'm going to be a bit short on that one. Just a few points. In the comments, what students identified is using Google Translate for syntax. So they're checking the word order by writing it first in the target language, and then translating it into English to make and back into target language and see if the syntax changes. Then to check the conjugation, and this is something what Google Translate does really well. And it has also been called one of the tell signs of if a student gets all their conjugation right, they must have been using Google Translate. Then the gender, to work out if a word is feminine, masculine, and for agreement as well. So all these things, and we know that from the research on those tools that these are actually areas where machine translation works really well. So it's a very good use of the tool for that purpose. And the other one here is my last one, machine translation for proofreading. So what I just said, so writing a text in the target language, translating into English to check if the translation makes sense in English, or sometimes, of course, corrections are also being made by the tool. And this is something that advanced students do more, possibly because they write more in their classes, but also because they're more aware of the complexity and are more able to use a supporting tool to identify errors in their text if they see a corrected version of it. Then we were interested to know of how they handle the output. So the question is, do they just copy and paste what they see in the translator, or do they actually double check it? And how do they double check it? And the double checking was a range of different ways how they did that. So double checking with native speakers, with with friends who speak the language, with peers, some say with teachers, online dictionaries, or they're going to another machine translation tool. They look in Google, they look in the textbook. Quite often they're really referring to their own knowledge. They change the input to make sure they're still getting a similar result, or they're breaking things down to make sure in smaller sequences to make sure that they really understand what is being translated. So a number of, or listening as well was another one, does it sound right? So a number of strategies that students mentioned that show that they're mainly not just copying and pasting, but really looking at the output and seeing if this is really what they want to say. And as you can tell here as well, this decreases, the double checking increases as they advance, and the copying pasting decreases. Okay, so how helpful is it? So what do teachers think and what do students think? So first, I was a bit disappointed because I could see no statistic significance between teachers and students. It seemed to be all the same. Because I kind of felt that as teachers might find it was less helpful than students, but that didn't seem right. However, when I compared the data between the advanced learners and the teachers, that was significant. And we see here, I just shared here the graphs with you. That the extreme helpfulness was much more perceived by the advanced learners than by the teachers. And that was then also when I did my little comparison between the different groups. I came up, and this was just a coincidence, but it came out with a nice error with the mean marks. The advanced students having the lowest, which means it's perceived as most helpful, showing a nice error like the advanced students leading the way with their knowledge and their experience of using machine translation to support their language learning. So what do I take away from that first study? Is that, well, most students are using it, regardless if teachers approve it or not, because, I mean, another question in that survey was, does your teacher approve, and is it part of your course outline? And there was a big question mark over that question. Nobody really knew what was happening, but teachers certainly had not put any policy in their course description. Then advanced and experienced learners seem to have the best strategies on how to use and to support their learning. And also the teachers seem to be less experienced than the language students, especially the advanced one. And in the end, I believe that both students and teachers would benefit from machine translation training. Now that brings me to the next point. So how do we train? There's a number of models that what people have done, running workshops on how to train students by showing them the technical features and how that then translates to the appropriate use in class. But I'd like to do a little detour and going into another discipline in the discipline of translation, where this has also been discussed, of course. I mean, for translators, machine translation tools are a big thing, and of course they've been around for a very long time. What is new here is they are open to the public and they're free. But of course, it's something that has been met with criticism for a very long time in that industry. So I just would like to make some parallels between what has been found in translation studies and how that can translate then to language education. So I'm just talking about the work of Lynn Bowker, who is a translation scholar based in Canada. And she has coined the term, she and her team have coined the term of machine translation literacy, which she refers to as a new type of digital literacy. In her view, it's less about the technical competence than about the cognitive side of things. So she has that sentence here, which is on my picture: using machine translation is easy, using it critically requires thought. So the idea, I mean, of course, we all can input a word in a search engine, but in a translator, but of course doing it purposefully and using it wisely and using it ethically is quite a different question. So whether we use it, when we use it, and why we use it are those questions that we need to ask. So the need to be an informed and critical user rather than copy, paste, sorry for the typo, and click. So if you go on her webpage, which is, you have that link on the very bottom, Machine Translation Literacy, there's all the talks, a number of discussions, her publications of her and her collaborators, which are really interesting. And you have also those infographics that she has developed, which of course made now for translators. So what do you need to consider when you use machine translation tools in translation? And the first one here, and this is now to the right, is the acceptance of machine translation. And she, in one of her talks, quite nicely talked about the 4 stages of machine translation acceptance, where she talked, the first stage would be the knee science, which she describes, I don't know about it, therefore it does not exist. And I believe some of those, my colleagues were a bit in that category. Then the second one is contempt. I loathe it, or I make fun of it. MT is stealing my job, so being wary of it. Then number 3 would be the reluctance, adaptation, and shame. I secretly use it. And the 4 is then leading to acceptance. I get to know it and use it. It changes my professional perspective, and I wonder why it took me so long. So we're kind of going through those. And I think our language teachers might be in a similar position. So I thought that progression was quite good for us as well. So a few things. So not all machine translation tools are the same. So we have, I just showed you Google Translate and DeepL, and there's of course a number of others. So they have different purposes, and you might use them for different things. Maybe Google Translate is more practical when you're out and about, but DeepL is more for your academic work. It's just, I mean, I don't want to make those statements, but it's just to illustrate the differences. And I would also add that it's different if you use your machine translation on an app or on your computer. So it will have also different functions depending on how you use it. You use different MTs for specific translation tasks. Then what you have to respect, of course, really important, privacy and confidentiality issues. So you can't just, if you as a translator, of course, if you have a private text and you stick it into the engine, well, it's machine learning. So what happens, this text sits then is public. So you have released the privacy of the text into the world. So that's, of course, something you should be very careful about, what you actually enter in a machine translation engine. Then, of course, acting with academic integrity, especially if you do work and you claim it's your work, you need to acknowledge that you have been using the translator. Be aware of the algorithms, which sometimes give you things that, assuming, for instance, the story about gender, that you have, that the translation engine assumes certain things. So those things are getting better, but we're not always getting it right. And then what she refers to as GIGO, is improve input to improve output. And this is, of course, something that we as language teachers and English learners, we create the input. So we can, of course, play with the input output, but as a translator, we're looking that having a given text as well. So that's maybe more of a one-way direction here, but that's something certainly where we have, where we need to work a bit more into those two directions. Okay, so this leads me now to how am I doing for time? 5 more minutes?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, cool. So in my last 5 minutes, I just want to talk about an intervention studies. So this is my very, very new project, which I'm just starting to work on. So this is a class of 10 advanced German students. So I wanted to check out now, how are those advanced students working with Google Translate or DeepL, if they're allowed to use this for a number of different purposes, and how do they evaluate their use for their language learning. So now a number of tasks, but I'm just narrowing it down to what is important to my talk today. So those students had to do a self-evaluation in which they had to well, look at their level and also look at their learning goals for different skills. Then they engaged in different tasks for which they could use machine translation. And then they had to evaluate the tool to support their goals. I've been analyzing this through affordance actualization theory, and just had to have done so far a thematic analysis of their data. And the question I had is, to what extent can self-determined machine translation use support the development of machine translation literacy in advanced language learners? Okay, so what did I do? Just the theory. Not sure if I have much time for that, but this is the framework which I found really interesting. So how do affordances develop? How do features turn into affordances is kind of the question. So how do features and personal goals create something which becomes the affordance of the learner, and can then also for that reason inform how we use machine translation in language education, and how can that feed back to our policy and how we implement machine translation in our classrooms. Now, I've been made aware of that by Tanaka Ellis, who has written also a paper on that topic. That's very recently. So affordance, so we have here the tool, we have the actor, which is a student with their goals. So they make something out of the feature, which is their affordance. Now this then becomes, of course, this is always a circular kind of development, because the more you know, the more you can also take advantage of this. But how does that relate then to the learning goal as well? So machine translation, not just to translate and to understand, but how does it become a learning tool? So we're going and have those tables here, which I have taken over from that model. So we have to the left the features of the technology. So what, or in this case of machine translation tools, what can the students do? What do they make out of them for themselves? And then what do they make of them in the context of, in the language learning context, where they're working in a formal learning environment? And how does that then influence, or how can that help us develop the goal of machine translation literacy in an academic environment? So I'm looking at those 5 different affordances, so reading, listening, speaking, writing, and vocabulary learning. So students reflected on all these, but I'm just going to talk a bit about the reading. So what have I done? So this is just a screenshot of the self-reflection. So you might be aware, I mean, those of you in Europe anyway, of the common European framework of reference, which has those different skills. So students had to develop their own goals according to those skills. So what do they want to achieve in the classroom and outside of the classroom? Then they had for class, I used an online journal, which has lots of different topics. We had 1 topic a week, and students had to find an article of their personal interest from this journal to discuss with their classmates. So this is where Google Translate starts. So here we have just an extract from chapter overview, where if you use the Chrome extension, you can it glosses your text. So you can just click on that, and then you have the German translation, which you can also play. This is with Google Translate. This is with DeepL, or of course you can just translate that whole page and then get the translations back into German if you click on them the same way. Here, if you want to choose your article, you can first look at everything in English, but of course the original was all in German as you go. So you can have this back and forth to orient yourself, to see what's going on, to choose what you want to read. So students had to read up on an article. Then we came out of lockdown, so we met once a week to talk and to go for walks and to talk in nature, just to get away from technology, just to have some human contact, talk about those articles. And then students had to write their blogs, in which you see text written in bold and text written in brackets. So this is a student who has written their text in German, then used Google Translate to correct the text, and they just gave me in brackets what they had done wrong, and then in bold what they have corrected. And then you see little things where I can tell that they changed the syntax, they changed the articles, etc. So I can, through that system, I can see what they have changed. So there, I'm just going a bit fast in the last minute. So the table you have seen, I have then broken that up into for my own situation. We have, so the features of Get Noticed for Reading. What are the features? We use the web translation extension. We use, is it used for glosses? Is it used for, as a dictionary, or do students use the camera? The second here, we have the characteristics. What do students know to do? So this is what they told me they can do. Then the examples in the third one, what they would have done if it wasn't for an assignment. And then in the third one, we have the learner, we have the approach to language learning, and that was leading to the goal. My goal being that machine translation literacy for second language learning, it enables students to engage in meaningfully engaged engagement with L2 text, and also to vocabulary development. And let's give you a few quotes, and I will finish with that. So before we looked at this in class, they used the camera function quite extensively. So I've got a few examples of that. So this student here, she read a book in German and used her phone to go over it to have the translation. So in the past, we would have used a dictionary to read a book, but she just goes over with a camera to get the translation and going back and forth. And the other students said when they were in Germany on exchange, they used the camera to look at posters to see what this was about. Now, when we're going here, you see number 4 on the very bottom. This wasn't useful at all in the context of the class, because the texts were already online and they didn't have anything they could take photos of or use the camera for. So they're very different. So here, different approaches how they use that extension. So one student says, I translate the article into English so I can get an overview. So first in English to know what it's about. Then the student says, I first read the website in German, then in English, and then again in German. So going back and forth, filling up the gaps. The students say, well, a bit of a mixed approach. He reads the easy things in German, the hard things in English, and gets an understanding of the text like that. Then we have another approach going here to vocabulary. So I write the words I don't know into translate, and then in his Quizlet, he revises the words and goes back to the text. So he feels having seen the words twice or more than twice in both languages helps him to understand things better. So takeaway from that intervention, I think it helped them to develop a better technical awareness. So here I differ with Bauke, who said it's more about the, well, of course it's more about the critical, but I think the technical thing is important as well, because if you don't know the technology, you can't also, you can't use it properly either. So I believe that provided with linguistic support, it allowed them to engage with a range of relevant sources. And this was all what they had put in their goals. They wanted to read more interesting texts. They go beyond their level of proficiency, just to be engaged with something that is relevant in their own lives. Their personal goals developed over time and became more focused as their engagement increased. And we could see that individual learners also had quite different approaches and developed different affordances, which related to their individual learning goals and their styles as well. And that's it.